Now, as the name of the video implies, this is the 17th and final part of a story, so if you haven't seen all previous parts, this likely isn't going to make any sense to you, so I'll include a link to all previous parts in the description below, so you can either catch up first or check out the first episode to see if you like it and want to eventually make your way back here. And now, without any further ado, let's finish this story. We once more find ourselves in a strange land separated by life and death, darkness and light, though now the dark half of this land seems to be receding, and standing within this changing land is Revan with his head lowered and his eyes apparently on the mask he has just dropped, and slowly starting to surround him in a non-threatening manner are Yoda, Bastila, Qui-Gon Jinn, and the daughter. And of them, it is Bastila who stands before him and then asks, "My love, is it really you?" Revan's head then nods faintly before he says, "It's me. It's always been me, and yet something more." Revan then looks up, and in his eyes we can see tears starting to form there as he says, "He was the one who sickened our son. He knew I would not rest until I made him well again, till I saved his life. And he knew that my search would lead me down the dark path, so far down it that I would do horrible things." Revan then turns around and faces Yoda before falling to a knee and lowering his head before him and saying, "Master Yoda, what I did to you was..." But Revan only shakes his head, unable to find the right words before continuing, "I offer you the most sincerest of apologies, and realize I do not deserve your forgiveness." Yoda then says, "My forgiveness you already have, Revan. Consumed you were by the dark side, and meet that with hate and vengeance. I will not." That is when the daughter speaks up, and she says, "This is all the fault of my brother, and the guilt and blame for all that has transpired is his and his alone to bear. But he has been defeated, for now." She then turns, and Qui-Gon hands her the dagger. For a moment, she looks it over and then says, "The dagger of the wills. It has gravely wounded and weakened him, but he is not destroyed." Revan, still down upon his knees, then turns his head and looks up at the daughter and says, "Then we should seek him out and finish it so he can never rise again." To that, the daughter's face grows dark, and she says, "Did you not hear the words of Master Yoda? The light is not a weapon to be used to seek out the darkness and destroy it. It is only to be used to keep it at bay and maintain the balance." To that, Revan shakes his head and says, "But this is our chance to end it forever. The dark side is nothing more than a corruption of the Force, and with our combined strength, we could easily..." But Revan is cut off by Bastila, who has moved forward and laid a hand upon his shoulder, and she says, "We could easily find ourselves treading within the very darkness we seek to destroy, and the amount of hate and suffering we could bring to this galaxy is unimaginable. Even I failed to understand this, for I believed it was up to our son to destroy the darkness forever, but it cannot be. Without the fear of the night, we can never truly appreciate the beauty of the day." Revan again shakes his head, more adamantly this time, as he gets to his feet. "No, you have not seen the things I have. You do not know the dark side as I do. We must destroy it. We must end this great conflict forever." Revan then looks around at each of them in turn, but none say anything. He then shuts his eyes, sighs, and says, "I have seen and broke the very fabric of the Force itself. My test upon Master Yoda, upon one so connected to the Force, created a new pathway between the living and the cosmic Force, and the pathway is the reason we are all here now." Revan sighs once more, and with his head now hung, goes on. "The first Jedi discovered how to achieve life after death, how to maintain consciousness within the cosmic Force. But they realized the price was too great and turned from that path. They realized that opening up the doorway to one side would leave it open for all the darkness within the cosmic Force to come through and begin to fester and grow within the living Force." Revan then looks up and again meets the gaze of all others and says, "But if we put an end to the darkness within the cosmic Force, if we destroy this emissary of all that is evil, this sun, then the doorway can remain open, and we can show others how to come through it, others we deem worthy, and who can remain vigilant and help make sure the darkness never rises again." Without a word, Bastila then wraps her arms around Revan, and for a long moment she holds him before simply saying, "We must shut the way, my love. The midichlorians are the only gatekeepers that should exist between life and death, between the living force and the cosmic. Their whispering the will of the Force to those wise enough to listen for it is the only guidance this galaxy needs, and the only it can stand. Revan shuts his eyes and then says, "If we shut the way, we will never again see our son. We will never again see Anakin." Bastila smiles. "So you have accepted the truth that he is our son." Revan gives a single nod of the head and says, "I have, and I very much wish to see him again. But if we close the way..." Bastila interrupts. "If we close the way, yes, it means we will never see him again. But it also means that Anakin can truly end this great threat you helped create. He can destroy this dark side remnant of you and help restore the balance. And it means the son will never find a way out of this place. He will never enter the galaxy and wreak untold havoc upon it." Revan shakes his head. "But what of the Sith that still endure? What of Sidious and..." But Bastila silences him with a kiss to the forehead and says, "Close your eyes, my love. Let the Force guide you. Let it show you all possible outcomes, and you will see, ultimately, our son will not fail, though he may know great pain and suffering along the way." That is when we switch scenes and get a shot of Anakin Skywalker standing alone, staring out a viewport at the streaking stars as the small ship he's on flies through hyperspace. And as we watch him, a look of confusion and maybe a bit of fear suddenly comes over his face, and he reaches out his hand and steadies himself against the wall, which is when we hear the voice of Padme say from behind him, "Are you okay? Anakin, what is it?" To that, Anakin shakes his head, turns, and gives her a weak smile. He then says, "It's nothing, I'm sure. Just some type of shift in the Force. Difficult to explain." Padme then moves forward, and now stands right behind him, and lays a hand on his back and says, "Do you think it has anything to do with what Obi-Wan told you, about the dark side place he needs your help destroying?" Anakin gives a small grin and says, "Probably." Then the grin fades, and he says, "Which is all the more reason why you shouldn't have come with us." Padme shakes her head. "No way. There was no way I wasn't coming." Her head then lowers, and she places one hand on her stomach and says, "My future is more intertwined in all this than you realize." That's when a look comes over Anakin's face that can only be described as panic, and he shuts his eyes and places a hand near Padme's stomach and concentrates. A few seconds later, almost looking defeated, Anakin opens his eyes and says, "Does Obi-Wan know?" Padme shakes her head. "No, he doesn't. I haven't been able to tell him, and he hasn't sensed it. Not that I know of, anyway." Anakin nods and says, "It's for the best, I suppose, since Obi-Wan seems willing to do what he must to stop this darkness, even, and maybe especially, if it costs him his life." Padme then takes hold of Anakin's hand, and with a pleading look on her face says, "Please make sure that doesn't happen, that he doesn't die." Anakin, looking a little confused, then replies, "Does that mean..." But Padme shakes her head quickly. "No, Anakin, it doesn't mean I want to be with him, but I would still rather not see the father of my child die." Anakin gives a slight smirk and says, "Children, you mean? You're having twins, Padme." She then looks confused and says, "But the droid said..." Anakin cuts her off with a shake of the head and says, "Droids can be wrong. The Force never is. You're having twins, Padme. Or maybe I should say, we're having twins?" Padme, looking horrified and hopeful at the same time, then says, "What exactly are you saying?" Anakin squeezes her hand and responds, "I'm saying that when this is all over, we can run away together, far away. I'll give up being a Jedi, and we can just be happy together, Padme. That is the decision I've made. That's what my mother would want." Padme seems to think and consider those words for a moment before finally nodding her head, and the two embrace, and the scene ends. We then find ourselves over the planet Mustafar, and watch as a small ship comes out of hyperspace and descends towards the planet's surface. A few moments later, we're on the planet's surface, and see that the ship has landed not far from a cave in the side of a mountain, and that, standing just outside it with a look of grim determination on his face, is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Standing not far from him, at the base of the ship's ramp, is Anakin and Ahsoka, who has her arms folded and seems to not be liking what she's hearing as she says, "How can you trust him, Master? I just don't understand it." "I don't trust him," Anakin answers back. "Not entirely. I'm not that big of a fool. But I can't help but feel like that Obi-Wan's destiny and my own are intertwined, that I'm meant to face some great evil on a world of fire." Anakin glances around at the molten lava-covered landscape of Mustafar and says, with a little bit of a shrug, Man, this place looks to qualify. Ahsoka gives him a look to let him know how absurd that sounded and says, "Then let me help you, Master. Let me go in there with you and face this evil." Anakin shakes his head. "No, you're not ready for whatever's in there. I'm not ready for whatever's in there. But Master Dooku has trained me well, so I have faith in myself and the Force that I will prevail." "But Master," Ahsoka starts to protest, but Anakin cuts her off and says, "You have to watch Padme. You have to keep her safe and get her out of here in case..." "In case what?" Ahsoka finishes. Anakin sighs and says, "In case I don't come out of that cave. And Obi-Wan the Sith does." As Anakin finishes what he's saying, Padme begins to walk down the ramp, and as she does, that's when Obi-Wan turns for a moment, locks eyes with her and smiles, and gives her a single nod of the head that seems to say farewell. Then before Padme can say or do anything in response, Obi-Wan says, "Anakin, it's time," before turning back around to face the cave. Anakin gives one last long look to Padme, before looking at Ahsoka and saying, "If anything goes wrong in there, don't try to be the hero, young one." Ahsoka gives a frown back and says, "I will do as instructed, Master, I promise." Anakin then walks over and stands beside Obi-Wan, and as the two gaze into the darkness of the cave together, Anakin asks, "Any idea what we're going to face in there?" "Only what we take with us," Obi-Wan says back, keeping his eyes forward. To that, Anakin smirks and pats the lightsaber hanging from his belt. I guess I'll be just fine then." Obi-Wan rolls his eyes a bit and shakes his head. "That's not what I meant at all. I mean that whatever's in there will try to use all your anger and fear against you, and you mustn't let it, Anakin, or it will not only destroy you, but whatever is in there will be set free." No longer smirking, Anakin nods and says he understands, and without another word to each other, the two walk forward and into the cave together. And then, for a rather long while, we watch as Anakin and Obi-Wan wander through the darkness, and though they entered together, they are now apart and alone. It's then while we're focused on Anakin that we hear a voice, the voice of a kind woman say, "Anakin? My dear sweet Anakin, is that you?" And that's when we see Anakin's head whip around from side to side, excitement in his eyes as he says back, "Mom?" Just out of the darkness then, we see Shmi Skywalker walk forward and toward Anakin, and after only the slightest moment of hesitation, Anakin runs forward and embraces her. "Oh, my dear sweet boy, how you've grown," we hear Shmi say. Anakin then says, "I've missed you, Mom. I've missed you so much. I tried to come back for you. I tried to save you, but..." Anakin cuts himself off and pulls back from his mother a bit and says, "But you were killed. How could you be here if you were killed?" Anakin then looks all around him and says, "And where is here? I'm having a hard time remembering how I even got here." "Then don't worry about it," his mother quickly says. "Just be happy that you found me, that you can help me, help us get out of this place." Anakin shakes his head. I don't understand. Are you stuck here?" Shmi nods her head excitedly. Yes, I'm stuck here, and only you can help me get out." We then, in his eyes, see that Anakin's mind is racing before he finally says, "Tell me then, Mom, how can I help you get out of this place?" There is then a flash, and suddenly we find ourselves revisiting and continuing a scene from some time ago, and we're in a cave lit only by a small fire, and see a young Obi-Wan Kenobi sitting next to Satine, who says to him, "You've been quiet for some time now. Is everything okay?" Obi-Wan gives a little shrug. "I'm just thinking about what you said, about who I could become if I abandoned the path of the Jedi." Satine gives him a small smile and says, "That's not exactly what I said." She's quiet for a moment and then continues, "But what have you been thinking about it?" Obi-Wan then turns his head, and at the very same moment, so does Satine, and the two lock eyes. Obi-Wan then reaches out and takes her hand and says, "I know you can never turn your back on your people. I know that you must become Duchess of Mandalore. Seeing peace brought to a people who have only known war is a noble task, worth giving up everything else for. But perhaps it's not one you have to embark on alone." Satine, trying to fight back a smile, then says, "Ben, just what are you saying?" "I'm saying that..." Obi-Wan begins, but stops himself when they both hear a noise and see a tall, robed figure enter the cave. That's when Obi-Wan drops her hand and says, "I'm saying it looks like Master Qui-Gon has finally returned, and hopefully with something for us to eat." But as the figure that has just entered the cave draws closer, and close enough to the small fire to be seen, it's not Qui-Gon Jinn, but rather a figure wearing the mask of Darth Revan. And before Obi-Wan can do anything, Revan reaches out one hand and catches him in a force choke and then proceeds to lift him and flings him up onto and pins him to the ceiling. That's when Revan frees and ignites a red saber with his other hand, and with quick, bold strides, marches towards Satine, and as she tries to scramble to her feet, he impales her through the chest with his saber. Obi-Wan then cries out in horror, and as Revan keeps him pinned to the ceiling, he deactivates his saber and lets it simply drop from his hand before he raises that hand to his face and removes the mask of Revan and reveals the grinning face of Anakin Skywalker. That's when there is a flash, and we now see Shmi Skywalker talking to her son Anakin, and she's saying to him, "You must reopen the doorway, Anakin, the one that keeps me trapped here." Shmi takes Anakin's hand and then says, "And then, together, we can walk back through it to the other side, to freedom from this place. You have the power to help me get out of here, Anakin." To that, Anakin, looking utterly confused, then shakes his head and says, "Doorway? What doorway? I don't understand, Mom. How did you get stuck here in the first place? And just, where is this place? I can't seem to remember." Shmi smiles at him and then says, "Can you at least remember how much I love you, Anakin? How I let you go to chase your dream of becoming a Jedi?" Anakin thinks for a moment and then nods, and Shmi continues, "Well, now you are a Jedi, my son. You're the greatest Jedi there's ever been, even powerful enough to get me, your beloved mother, out of this wretched place." Anakin shakes his head a bit and then says, "But you died. I remember that too. We didn't get to you in time, and the Sith Lord, he killed you, Mom." Shmi immediately then says, "No, Anakin, no, you're not remembering it right. He didn't kill me. He put me here, in this place. And all you have to do now is reach down deep, down into the very fabric of the Force and unravel it, that's all." A smile lights up Shmi's face as she finishes, "And if you take my hand, I can even help you. I can show you how." And with that, Shmi extends her hand out to him, and after staring at it for several seconds, Anakin turns around and says, "Just let me think for a moment, Mom. Let me get my head straight." That's when we see, standing behind Anakin, not Shmi Skywalker, but rather the son, with a large wound running down his face. We then see his lips move, but Shmi's voice comes out and he says, "Of course, son, just hurry. There is another who also wants freedom from this place, and we must see to it that we get out of here before he does." Which is when there is yet another flash, and we're back in the cave where young Obi-Wan has just watched Satine be stabbed by Anakin in Revan's mask, and we watch as Anakin now releases the force choke on Obi-Wan and lets him fall from the ceiling to the floor, which is when we notice Obi-Wan no longer looks young, but rather his right age, and his face is once again scarred and burnt. And as Obi-Wan tries to collect his wits about him and recover from the choke and subsequent fall, another figure enters the cave, and this time it's Padme Amidala, and we watch as she makes a grand gesture out of flinging her arms around Anakin, and the two then proceed to engage in a long, passionate kiss, which Obi-Wan averts his gaze from. Looking at Obi-Wan now with disgust in her eyes, Padme then says, "I figured you had finished him off by now. What's the holdup?" To that, Anakin gives a careless shrug and says, "Yeah, can't I just have a little fun with him first? Make him suffer a bit?" But Padme shakes her head. "Is there really a need for that? That pathetic thing has been through enough already, I'd say. What with Qui-Gon picking you over him, and then me picking you over him? Poor Obi-Wan was just never good enough. Never anyone's choice. Save one." Padme then takes from Anakin the mask of Revan and holds it out to Obi-Wan as she says, "There's only ever been one who's ever believed in you, Obi-Wan. Only one who helped you become something, to become someone." At those words, Obi-Wan shuts his eyes tight and mutters the name Satine, which causes the image of Padme holding the Revan mask to frown angrily before suddenly morphing into and becoming an image of Satine holding Revan's mask. And when Obi-Wan's eyes again open and he sees Satine, they instantly well up with tears as he begins to crawl forward towards her. "Yes, my dear sweet Ben," Satine says, "you can still carry out my dream. You can still bring peace to Mandalore. As their general, you can finally unite the houses under one banner, your banner, and lead them to victory after victory across the very galaxy. It's always been your destiny, my dear sweet Ben." We then watch as Obi-Wan continues to crawl forward till he reaches Satine, takes from her the mask, gets to his feet, and puts it on. Which is when there is another flash, and we're now again with Anakin, who is still pondering what to do while the son stands behind him, and the look on his face has suddenly become very impatient as he says in the voice of Shmi, "We must go now, my son." But Anakin shakes his head and says, No, this isn't right. I remember why I came in here now. I remember that Obi-Wan said that I would only find what I brought with me. Anakin turns around and sees the image of his mother standing before him. I don't know who or what you are, but you will not use my love for my mother against me. She is gone and one with the Force. That is not something that brings me pain or something I wish to change. It is something that brings me comfort. Whatever you are, you have failed. The image of Shmi then smiles wickedly before suddenly lunging at Anakin and turning back into its true form, the sun. Anakin, caught off guard, can only raise his hand to shield himself from the attack, but when he does, there is a blinding flash of light, and the sun seems to hit some sort of invisible force field around Anakin. That's when the sun, who's been knocked off his feet, says, mostly to himself, "So, you have chosen your champion, is that it, Father? You desire this boy to be my new keeper." The son shakes his head and says, No, I will not have that, Father." The son then gets to his feet and tries to lunge at Anakin again, but in response, Anakin simply raises his hand and a blinding white light consumes the sun. But the sun is not knocked back this time. Instead, he fights it and tries to get to Anakin with everything he's got. And the harder he tries, the more pain he seems to endure. And slowly but surely, we watch as the body of the sun becomes twisted and deformed, before, finally, he gives up and simply collapses to the ground. Anakin then turns around, sees the entrance to the cave, and begins to walk towards it, as the body of the sun seems to disintegrate into dust that is quickly swept away by a strong wind. Which is when we switch scenes and are taken just outside the cave and see Ahsoka standing not far from it with her arms folded and tapping her foot impatiently, when suddenly we see Anakin emerge from the cave, and when he does, we watch Ahsoka smile briefly before jogging up to him and saying, "You weren't in there very long, Master. You sure you did what you were supposed to do?" Anakin gives a quick grin and says, "I'm not sure I did exactly what I was supposed to do, but I think it's done. My half anyway. Problem is, I think this was simply a test of some kind for me, and that it's Obi-Wan that truly must face and destroy the darkness that dwells in there." Anakin then looks all around him and asks, "Where's Padme?" "Waiting in the ship," Ahsoka says. "I told her to take off if anything at all seems to be going wrong." To that, Anakin frowns and says, "Those weren't exactly my instructions." Ahsoka gives a slight shrug and says, "I tried to improvise on them a bit, Master. Figured if something did go wrong, it wouldn't be with you, but with Obi-Wan, and you might need my help against him." Anakin's just about to say something to that when a red glow coming from the cave catches his and Ahsoka's attention, and both watch as Obi-Wan, wearing the mask of Revan and wielding his ignited red saber, emerge from the cave. "Looks like something did go wrong," Anakin mutters. That's when Ahsoka quickly ignites both her sabers and says, "We can take them together, Master." But just as she makes her very first move, Obi-Wan makes a swiping motion with his hand, and Ahsoka is lifted up off her feet and flung towards a river of molten lava. But before she goes crashing into it, Anakin reaches out with the Force, catches her, and puts her safely down near the ship. All Anakin says then is, "Get on that ship, Ahsoka, and get yourself and Padme out of here. I'll handle this." Ahsoka takes a long look at Obi-Wan, then Anakin, and then finally climbs the ramp of the ship without a word. That's when we hear Anakin say to Obi-Wan, "This was a trap all along, wasn't it? You never intended to destroy the darkness in this place. You wanted to merge with it, and you wanted me to go in there because you knew you couldn't defeat me, that I'm too powerful for you, so you wanted something in there to do it for you." That's when we hear the voice of Revan respond, "Ma, you are full of yourself, my son, and a fool. Obi-Wan did seek to destroy me and the power here, but he was too weak, and now he is no more." Anakin shakes his head to that and says, "I don't know who you think you are, but you're not my father." Revan then says, "Oh, how little you truly know and understand. It's a shame the part of me that could have loved you is gone, for the greatness I will achieve alone could only ever have been eclipsed by what we could have achieved together, my son." Anakin shakes his head and gives a smug grin. "No, I'd never turn to the dark side." We hear Revan then snort as he says, "Oh, you say that with such conviction, my boy, so much so that I almost think you believe it. But like you, I am powerful enough to look into the future that is ever in motion, and see all the different paths that lay before us. And no matter what path you choose, Anakin, they all lead to pain and suffering. They all lead to darkness for you. It is unavoidable. It is your destiny. Anakin shuts his eyes tight, shakes his head, and then says, No, you're wrong. When I'm done with you, I'll be done with all of this. I'll leave it all behind and find happiness with Padme. That is the only path before me. And without another word, Anakin takes hold of his saber, ignites it, and charges at Revan. Which is when we suddenly find ourselves back in the cave from many years ago, and see, sitting by the fire, not a young Obi-Wan, but the older, scarred one. And sitting next to him, looking as she did the very last time Obi-Wan saw her alive, is Satine. And as the two sit next to each other, they watch the fire, and within the flames, they, and us, can see the battle between Revan and Anakin. And it is a true spectacle, one where Revan, the chosen one of the dark side, battles Anakin, the chosen one of the Force itself. We then hear Obi-Wan say, Anakin can't beat him. The dark side is too strong with Revan. Satine then says, laying a hand on Obi-Wan's arm, he could if you help him. If you give Anakin but one moment, one small opening, perhaps. Obi-Wan's eyes then narrow partly in confusion and partly in anger. Are you saying, I should try and help Anakin kill me? Satine then says back, You're as good as dead already in this place. But Obi-Wan shakes his head to that. No, we don't have to stay here in this cave. We can leave and go anywhere we want. We can be together forever. To that, Satine shuts her eyes and lowers her head. No, Ben, this is only a prison Revan has created for you, one he hopes you won't even bother trying to escape from. Again, Obi-Wan shakes his head, but instead of saying anything, he looks into the fire, at the battle between Anakin and Revan, and we see that, slowly but surely, Anakin seems to be tiring, while Revan only appears to be gaining strength. It's only a matter of time before Anakin falls, Satine says. Obi-Wan then says back, but there's nothing I can do to help. No way for me to gain control, even for a moment. We then suddenly hear another voice come from someone who has just entered the cave at long last, and it is Qui-Gon Jinn. The Obi-Wan I knew was always too headstrong to give up so easily. Obi-Wan's mouth goes slack for a moment, and he looks happy to see his old master, but that happiness quickly becomes anger as he says, But you chose Anakin over me. Qui-Gon replies, No, Obi-Wan. There was nothing left for me to teach you when we encountered Anakin. I took our finding him as a sign from the Force, a sign that it was time for me to let you go, to become the Jedi you were meant to be. It wasn't about me choosing him over you. It was about me accepting that my time as your master had come to an end. Immediately, all the anger drains from Obi-Wan's face, and he says as he shuts his eyes, I'm so sorry, Master. I've been such a fool. But when he opens them again, Qui-Gon is gone, though Satine remains, and she now looks at him with pleading eyes, but says nothing. Obi-Wan then glances at the fire, and sees that Anakin has taken a hit to his left shoulder, and his arm hangs limply, and it looks like Revan is about to finish him off. That's when Obi-Wan says, I must know before I do this, are you really Satine, or are you just some part of my subconscious, trying to get me to do the right thing? Satine then smiles at him and says, What does your heart tell you? Obi-Wan smiles back and says, That you are a part of the Force, and soon, so shall I be. Obi-Wan then shuts his eyes, and there is a flash, and we see Anakin breathing heavily, one arm hanging limply at his side as he stands at the bottom of a slight embankment with a river of molten lava at his back. Revan then says, I'm sorry, my son, but at least I shall make your death quick. At least you shall be spared all the pain and suffering that we both know you were destined for. Revan then raises his saber, but then hesitates, and it is in that moment that Anakin swings his saber and chops his arm off right at the elbow. Anakin then swings again and takes out both of his legs right at the knees, and what's left of Revan falls into a heap and tumbles close to the edge of the lava. Anakin then raises his saber over his head, ready to deliver the finishing blow, when Revan, using the one hand he has left, quickly removes the mask, and it is Obi-Wan that says to Anakin, Destroy the mask, Anakin. It contains all the power from the cave within it, all the power the dark side has been gathering. For a brief moment, Anakin hesitates before swinging his saber and severing the mask in two, Anakin then puts his saber to the throat of Obi-Wan, and all Obi-Wan does in response is nod his head and shut his eyes. Anakin then says to him, "You were right. We could have been brothers. I've seen it before in my visions. I'm sorry it has to come to this." But it is just then that we hear Padme scream out, "No!" And Anakin's head snaps up, and racing towards him are both Padme and Ahsoka. Obi-Wan then says, "Don't listen to her. Please just end my life. Let me be one with the Force. Let me be with Satine. I beg of you, Anakin." Anakin's eyes then go back and forth between Padme and Obi-Wan a few times, and it's only when Padme subtly moves one hand to her stomach that Anakin deactivates his saber and turns away from Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan then screams out, "No, Anakin, please end this!" But Anakin shakes his head, takes a few steps away, and takes from Obi-Wan's severed arm the lightsaber that was still being clutched in the hand and says, "Your fate is for the Force to decide, not me, and not even you." Obi-Wan continues to scream at Anakin as he simply walks away from him and towards Padme and Ahsoka. In one hand, Anakin holds his own blue saber. In the other, Obi-Wan's red. Ahsoka then says to him as he approaches, "You're just going to leave him here to suffer, Master?" Anakin shuts his eyes and almost seems to consider going back. "I don't know why," he then says, "but it is what I must do. I feel it. His fate is for the Force to decide, not me." Padme looks like she's about to say something, but Anakin gives her a look and shakes his head, and she falls silent. Anakin and Ahsoka then walk towards the ship, but Padme lingers for a moment and simply stares sadly at the suffering Obi-Wan. Which is when we switch scenes and see their small ship hovering above the planet Ahch-To, where the Temple of the First Jedi Temple resides, and then we're in the ship and watch as Anakin hands his lightsaber to Ahsoka and says, "Give it to Master Dooku, please. He'll know what it means, and he'll know, if I'm ever truly needed again, it will find its way back to me." Ahsoka nods, yet looks sad as she says, "Some of us might still need you now, Master. I mean, Anakin." Anakin smiles at her and says, "I'm sorry I'm abandoning your training, Ahsoka, but there is another life waiting for me, and I foresee you will become a great Jedi, no matter who your master is." Ahsoka manages a faint smile, takes the lightsaber, but then says, her eyes going to Obi-Wan's red saber hanging from Anakin's belt, "And what about that saber, Master? What are you going to do with that one?" But to that, Anakin says nothing and only gives her a small smile before hitting a button that opens a hatch to an escape pod, one she will take down to the planet. And a moment later, the scene shifts down to the surface of Ahch-To, to the island of the First Jedi Temple, and we watch as Ahsoka hands Anakin's saber to Dooku, and it's hard to tell if the look on his face is that of profound sadness or profound joy. We then suddenly find ourselves on another planet entirely, and see young Caleb Dume, with an old wooden box tucked under his arm, wandering through a vast grassland in a state of utter confusion. We then see a speeder approach him, and when it gets close, two people get out of it, a man and what appears to be his wife, and the man says to him, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Meekly then, Caleb nods his head, and the man begins to help him over to the speeder as he asks Caleb his name, but Caleb only shakes his head and says he can't recall. That's when the man says, "Well, my name is Ephraim Bridger, and this is my wife Mira." And the scene ends. And next, we're taken to a scene of a shuttle as it comes out of hyperspace above the planet Kamino. We're then inside the shuttle and see the hooded and deformed face of Darth Sidious talking to a blue hologram of the Kaminoan Dr. Search, and we hear the doctor say, "Ah, Chancellor Palpatine, this is an unexpected pleasure." Sidious then replies, "Dr. Search, I trust your research has been going well." "Oh, it has indeed," the doctor replies. "The Jedi samples you've provided have yielded many secrets to me. I think I'm on the verge of understanding just how the Force itself works. Oh, and you'll be happy to know I will be implementing some improvements in the next batch of clones, assuming you do still plan on picking them up eventually." To that, Sidious smiles and says, "Yes, I will soon have need for the clone army, but first, I have another project for you to work on, and I'm bringing it to you now." Dr. Search claps his hands together gleefully and says, "Oh, how I do love your projects. I look forward to learning more about it when you arrive." The image then fades away, and we then watch as Sidious turns and takes a few steps towards a table, And strapped down to that table is the unconscious form of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And we hear Sidious say to him, "Oh, how fortunate you are that I found you still alive, for there is much work left for us to be done, my apprentice." And finally, we are taken to a beautiful planet where Anakin Skywalker stands on a bit of a hill, watching a breathtaking sunset. And then we watch as Padme Amidala, a baby in both arms, walks up to him and stands beside him, and they both then smile at each other before again looking upon the sunset. And that is how this story ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. But now, let me take a moment to say thank you to everyone who has followed the story for the last 17 weeks, and to those of you who may find it down the road and have made it this far. Telling the story has been a true privilege for me, and it will not be my last, though I will likely be taking a few weeks off before starting the next one, both to focus on the release of The Last Jedi and to figure out what that next story will be. So until then, tell me your final thoughts on this story and give me suggestions for the next one. And until next time, thank you so very much for watching.